The Royals have won 6 of their first 10 games to open up the year and suddenly now have your attention. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. The national championship game is tonight between Purdue and UConn, and PrizePicks has some great offers for you. But also, the NBA is in full swing, MLB, NHL, so head over there and also start making some picks with PrizePicks on all the major leagues. But we're going to have more on them coming up in about 15 minutes or so. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Royals channel. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, I am based here in Kansas City. I work in sports over at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Do some hosting over there. I'll actually be on tomorrow night, 7 to 10, and I'll be co-hosting as well throughout the week, and I do some producing. So stay pretty busy over there in everything involving sports. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. And a much better Monday feel, I think, even than last week that we had. The Royals were coming off an 11-0 victory over the Twins, but they had lost the series against Minnesota. I think a lot of people at the time felt like, well, you look at that team and Sunday felt a little fluky because game 1 and game 2 was more so what they should be like. And then you had Baltimore coming up. So it was a 1-2 start and was, oh, geez, if you're just be lucky to take 1 in Baltimore, which the Royals did. They only took 1. But in all likelihood, should have left with a sweep. They blew the game on Monday night, and they blew the game on Wednesday. So the Royals headed back to Kansas City, I think, with something to prove. Though some of us that were more optimistic looked at that team and said 2-4 is still fine considering what we felt 2 games into the year. You were 500, 2-2, let a couple of games slip away. Now you needed to beat up on a bad team. But I had said take 3 of 4. Because you never really walk into a 4-game series and say, sweep them. I don't care how bad the team is. It is really, really hard to beat a team 4 times in 4 days. And with the Royals, you look at somebody like Chicago, they're a terrible baseball team. And I like Pedro Grifol a lot. I do not know how much longer he's going to last there. But the Royals did, I think, what even a few of us that were optimistic didn't think was going to be done. Especially not yesterday with the pitching matchup, Garrett Crochet, the ace of the White Sox, and the Royals' 5th starter, and Alec Marsh. Alec Marsh has been fine as the 5th starter, but that's a number 5 versus a number 1. I mean, the odds are not going to be in your favor, and Crochet looked great through 4 innings. They had a 3-0 lead. Crochet's stuff looked unhittable. It's like, okay, we can pack it all up here, have the off day at 500, and welcome a 3-7 Astros team. Well, then the Royals had their first come-from-behind victory of the year. And you look at them at 6-4. And April was important. We talked about this. April was very, very important to maintain a level of energy around the team. A hot start was supposed to grab that attention of the fan base. And for those that thought, well, the start to the year 0-2, same old, they're going to be 3-10 or 4-15. This team responded very well. And I think that Baltimore series was a wake-up call a little bit. In a good way, though. I think that series was an indicator of we're not as far behind these teams as many think. And I'll double on top of that and say the Royals were a unique team this offseason that despite losing 106 games, some people picked them to win the division. I mean, that is immense pressure for a team that has never dealt with pressure like that. Even in the years they were good, 14, 15, had the expectation in 16. It really wasn't until 2016 that the Royals started getting picked to win their division. I mean, after they had lost in Game 7 in 2014, there were still people that thought there were other teams in the Central that could be better than them. Remember, Detroit was in that middle part of the 2010s, kind of the top team in the Central. Very expensive, very loaded, good rotation. I think a lot of people still counted on the Tigers to be that team. Then the Tigers sold everybody and kind of bottomed out in that division. And the Cleveland Indians at the time kind of took reign of the Central in 16 and 17 and 18 and so on and so forth. And the White Sox had their moment. But the Royals were a team, bottom of the league, or at least right ahead of Oakland, and then picked to win the division. And a hot start was very important for that because now you're grabbing the attention of not just your own fan base, you're grabbing the attention of everybody. And that is an exciting thing. You can tell with this team right now, there's a lot of juice. There's a lot of juice with this team. They're very confident. It's showing. The rotation is just great start after great start after great start. The bullpen, as we talked about last week, has evened out at least for 4 games. They didn't give up a run in that series. And I think the way I would describe it, they've graduated from we let all the runners we put on score to, well, we're putting a lot of runners on, but they're not scoring. You can take that when they're trying to even out. And that's what I was getting at with a streaky bullpen. Sometimes you look up and they've got 20 consecutive scoreless innings. It's just the way it happens, even with bad bullpens. And since they've evened out, the Royals now have a top 3 pitching staff in baseball. And that's a big part as to why they are 6-4 and on a 4-game winning streak through 10 games. You could look at it and say they should have won 7 in a row at this point, or 8 in a row, whatever it would be. I mean, truthfully, this Royals team is exceeding the expectations even I set for them through 10 games. I knew that this schedule was going to be pretty daunting. And don't look at Houston's record that's coming in at 3-7. Houston is still Houston. They are likely going to be in the thick of it when it gets to September and the AL West is a highly contested race. They're probably going to be there. Once they get healthier and guys start to come around, they're going to be a good team. So you take 2 of 3 from Houston. I still consider that to be very impressive. You got the Mets on the road. The Mets were kind of a laughingstock going into the weekend. Now they've rattled off a couple of wins, and it's a road game. It's a road series. So, you just take 1, or maybe you're fortunate enough to take 2. You walk back to Chicago, or not walk back to, they haven't gone there this year. That you walk over to Chicago, take on the same White Sox team you just ripped off 4 in a row from. So you have these next 3 series coming up, and you want to say that 12-7 can be possible. And my goal for this first 32-game stretch, in which the Royals will see a lot of talented teams, because right after the White Sox, they got to take on Baltimore again. And then there's going to be like Texas sprinkled in there. There's going to be Milwaukee sprinkled in there. There's really good teams that they're going to see. They're going to see Detroit. Detroit is right above them in the standings, though they just lost a series against Oakland. That's how tough baseball can be. So winning 4 in a row, rattling off 4 in a row, that's all very impressive against one major league team at this level. It's always going to be impressive. And that's what's grabbed the attention. You can see the fire and the intensity with this team through 10 games. I mean, let's be honest. It's 10-game sample size. It's very small. But you also look at where they've been buried before. You lose the first 2, well, maybe it's not in the cards, and we've got time to turn things around. I think this team knew they had to turn things around quickly to get that support. They had heard all the noise after 2 games and how this team wasn't very good and the bullpen was terrible and same old, same old. They're 6-2 since then. And if you want to say, well, now they're going to be woken up against a good Astros team and you're not buying into the record, like I'm not buying into the record. Well, they took on 2 division champions, and now we're going to get a 3rd division champion in their first 4 series. They've had a tough schedule to open up the year, but they're doing what an improved team will do. You hang around with the good teams, and you beat up on the bad teams. That's what they've done through 10 games so far. It's impressive stuff. It's only 10 games, but April is very important. I said that if they were 14-18 in that first 32-game sample size, I would be satisfied with it. You look at it now, that would be, 8-14, that'd be a pretty bad 22-game stretch. I think the goal should be now get to 500, be 16-16. I think 10-12 is very manageable with this team. I think that would be welcomed, and that would be weathering the storm through a very tough start to the year. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, MJ Melendez was the star of that series against the White Sox. Is it something to buy into now? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the title sponsor today in PrizePicks. Spring training is over and baseball season is officially underway. Don't miss your chance to add on your favorite players from the diamond in your PrizePicks entries. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, take your pick of more or less and add them to your PrizePicks entries today. You can also get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. The playoffs begin April 20th with the play-in rounds being April 16th, 17th, and 19th. So go and download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for a first deposit match of up to $100. Well, I understand that going into the year, the Royals had a few players that were going to get scrutiny from the fan base just because of what last year it looked like. And I think that we latch on to certain guys. Like sometimes a fan base just picks one or two or three guys. And whether it's the expectation that was set for that player or the fact that you don't like the way he plays, maybe he's not a guy that hustles that much, he's not a good defender. You know, there were a couple of guys pegged this year in spring training of they had to get out to a good start as well as the team, but they had to win over the fan base a little bit. I thought Kyle Isbell was one of those guys that had to win over the fan base. I thought Michael Massey was one of those guys that had to win over the fan base, but we probably will see him a little bit later on toward the end of April because we haven't had a chance to see him just yet. And I thought MJ Melendez was that third guy. You know, Jordan Lyles, I think, was a guy, too, that obviously you can throw in there, but I'm not really going to make an excuse, or I'm not going to defend Jordan Lyles. He's in a long relief role. It's kind of hard to screw up the long relief role on a big league team. And Brady Singer is probably another good name to throw in there as a guy that had to go back and win over the fan base. And I think for MJ Melendez, for me, it was the expectation that was put on him. And then he comes up to the big leagues and he's not that good of a defensive catcher. And then he wasn't good in the outfield. And then when you struggle at the plate, it's like this guy provides you nothing. Or at least some people thought that way. And I am not going to say that MJ Melendez was great last year. He wasn't. I think the numbers were a little bit better than maybe people expected, but overall, not a good year. Not one you hang your hat on and you say, that's something I'm very proud of. I think the only thing you would say I'm proud of it was I learned a new position, didn't play it well, but had to adjust on the fly, and I had a really good second half. That's what I think you could walk back with and say, I'm proud of that. But to begin this year, you know, MJ Melendez had a really big responsibility of he had to be that guy in the middle of the lineup to show that he was worth the fifth spot there. You know, he was better than the guys he was hitting in front of. He was supposed to be the guy that could drive in Salvador Perez if he got on. Provide a little bit of thunder in the lineup. And so far, in these first 10 games, I think he's done that and then some. He had the go-ahead hit or home run in 3 of those 4 games. The last 3 games of that series, MJ Melendez pretty much won them the game. And no, it's not that he's fixed. And I am not doing a victory parade. I'm not doing a victory lap and saying Melendez is the guy I always thought he would be. I'm not going to do that just yet because I've always said you really do know who a hitter is and what they're going to be for the season, like on June 1st. They can always have a really bad or really good second half, but you can start to get a better feel as to what this hitter is going to look like. So he still has to do this for another month and a half. And he's probably not going to do it at this level. We all know, though, where you expect MJ Melendez to be. I mean, I think if he put together, a 270 batting average, OBP in the 340s, he pops 25 home runs, 20 to 25 home runs this year, okay enough in left field. or right field like he had to play the other night, I can take that from MJ Melendez. But another part to this that I think is at least intriguing and interesting to bring up is that MJ Melendez had a really good second half, right? A really, really good second half. And then you carry that into April, you start to wonder just a little bit, was that adjustment he made making him a better player permanently? Like, is this something where you go, it's a big enough sample size? And that's much easier said than done to carry second half success of last year into April. It's really hard to do because there's so much time off, right? And these are huge and impactful games for the Royals. It's 10 games, but we've seen them bury themselves in April so many times. So if you are one of the fans that says not buying it, it's 10 games, they're going to blow it eventually, that's all fine and dandy. But it is much better as to where they're at now than the alternative. They are top 5 in Major League Baseball in run differential. That is an important stat to point out. The reason I say that is because in 2021, when they had the best record in April among anybody in baseball, they were 16-9. They had a terrible run differential. It was like negative 15 or something. Like when they were losing, they were getting smoked. In all 10 games so far, the Royals have either been winning in the 9th inning, leading and blown it, tied, or down 1. Those are the only scenarios they've had through 10 games. So when they've lost in all 4 of those games, 2 of them have been walk-offs. The other 2, they were tied 1-1 in the 9th, and they were down 2-1 going into the 9th. So these are positives you take away. And I think a really encouraging sign is that the guys that you needed to step up, the guys you weren't confident in, Melendez, Singer, Isbell, they've all done well. And guys like Vinny Pasquantino, who I'm still not overly concerned with, I think he's pressing a little bit, but like Vinny Pasquantino, I think is going to be fine. He struggled to begin last year as well. I think once he catches fire a little bit, he's going to be just fine. I don't think they need to move MJ Melendez up in the lineup. If he's hitting well in the 5 spot, leave him in the 5 spot. You know, Hunter Renfroe now is hitting 4 straight days or 4 straight games that he's played in. I mean, the average isn't pretty, but he's providing more than what he did in the first 6 games of the year. Like, I'm happy to see Kyle Isbell show what he's capable of. That's the most promising thing of this. I'm excited that Melendez can do this. And it's not just blowout games and he's hitting singles and just, barely lining them over second base. And I would take hits. Hits are hits. But big time clutch moments for him. He has the go-ahead hit on Friday night to break a 1-1 tie. Then he has a 2-run home run that should have been a ground rule double, but you'll take it. It would have drove in a run. So ground rule double, but it was ruled a home run on Saturday. And then a go-ahead 2-run home run in the 7th inning yesterday. So I look at MJ Melendez, and it was cool to see that in the postgame and when he was interviewed in the locker room, it was, I have a lot of confidence right now. A lot of this is just believing in myself. And we sometimes rule that out when we're watching these players play a very tough game. It's like, well, confidence is great, but you need to make adjustments and do this and this and that. We're all coaches from our couches. Like, we think we can do it better. At least some of us believe that way. Oh, I could do that better. I'm not one of those people, but I know a few people in my life that they are the coaches from the sofas. And they will pinpoint and nitpick every little thing. But a big part of a young player is confidence. If you believe you're good enough and you stroll up to the plate going, I am going to do something productive here, it can lead to things like this. When you are nervous and you are anxious and you are tight and you are pressing, something we're seeing with Vinny Pasquantino, it can look like that. That the expectation put on your shoulders. And Vinny dealt with a lot of, this was going to be a guy, I put pressure on him. I said he's going to be an all-star this year. I still believe that to be the case because he has 2 or 3 good games in a row. You feel much better about what his numbers look like. But it's MJ Melendez and Isbell right now that are really overperforming what some people set for them. It's good to see. It's good to see those guys playing with confidence because they were 2 players last year that really felt it from the fan base at times. They were getting the brunt of it over and over and over again. And MJ Melendez was a huge part in this team winning all 4 games. 3 of the 4 were basically attributed to his bat. So we'll see what he is capable of doing in this upcoming series against the Houston Astros. Before we move on to our final segment, I do want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, it appears that the closer's role has already been handed over to James McArthur, who's now closed out the last 2 save opportunities for the Kansas City Royals, or 2 of the last 3. Chris Stratton had that game closed out on Saturday night, but 2 of the last 3 have gone to McArthur. So I believe the Royals have officially made that move, and I'll tell you why next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me that follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the other sponsor today in Game Time. If you are trying to buy any tickets for the upcoming games against Houston, there are 3 beginning on Tuesday, they'll be on Wednesday and Thursday. Then they're going to have a little bit of a long road trip before they welcome back the Baltimore Orioles to Kauffman Stadium in 2 weekends. So Game Time is the place to go when you're thinking about buying tickets. Maybe you are somebody that is in Chicago or you're in New York and you're watching this podcast and you want to watch the Royals and buy tickets. We'll do so over at Game Time, and we have a great deal that is running over at Game Time. And it also doesn't just have to be baseball games. It can be basketball games. It can be comedy shows. It can be concerts. Whatever you're thinking about buying, Game Time is going to have you covered. So go and download the app today. And for a limited time, all users can get $20 off of any MLB purchase of $150 or more in the Game Time app with code FIRSTPITCH. Terms apply, and that's code FIRSTPITCH, FIRSTPITCH, for $20 off, and that's going to run to April 14th. So by the end of this week, that will no longer be available. So go and get started with Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, once again, the Royals approached a scenario in this White Sox series where a save opportunity presented itself, and it was on Friday night because the Royals bludgeoned the White Sox on Thursday. And once again, it was McArthur going to Will Smith. And I was at this game. I was in person, in attendance at Kauffman Stadium. And I saw Will Smith warming up, and I thought to myself, you know, this is a scenario for them where it's either going to go one way or the other. And we know that's baseball. You know, you have a 1-run lead. You kind of feel like, well, this guy's either going to get a ton of confidence after this and wash away any doubt that we may have had, or he's going to blow it again and people are going to be like, he better not have a full locker by the time he gets to the clubhouse. He might as well have been sent to Omaha or DFA. Just get him out of here, right? That's what I think a lot of people were feeling after the loss against Baltimore, in which Will Smith blew a 1-run lead. But McArthur went back to him in game 2 of that series. And I did think that at the time, for the matchups that were coming up, it wasn't a terrible move. And again, Will Smith was signed to be this team's closer. His stuff doesn't look good right now, but he was signed because of his closing experience. He had pitched in the playoffs, and though he was reaching his mid-30s, he still had good enough stuff, at least the Royals thought, to get them a handful of saves early on in the year. And then if they wanted to make the transition, they could do that. But I thought this was interesting because when Will Smith was coming into the game, McArthur immediately had James McArthur warming up. Like, the faith was not there. There was not a ton of confidence in Will Smith getting this done. And I could tell what the reason was for. If Will Smith put 2 guys on, he probably was coming out of the game because right-handers were coming up, and he didn't want Will Smith facing a right-hander with the game on the line. And Luis Robert doubles, hurts himself, and he's going to be out for a couple of months, it now looks like, for the White Sox, just adding more pain to that season for Pedro Grifol. But Luis Robert doubles, and then he walks the next batter. So here comes James McArthur. Will Smith is booed off the mound. McArthur comes in, double play ball, and I tweeted out that night, and again, you can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, said James McArthur won the closer role. And I was still in the stands, It's not like I had texted somebody and said, hey, is James McArthur now the closer? I just had this feel that that was Will Smith's opportunity. And the broadcast brought it up on the next day when the Royals won game 3-0, that Will Smith, being the veteran and the experienced guy that he is, went into Matt Quattro's office and said, whatever you need me to do, I will be okay with. You don't need to, feel like I'm only going to pitch in the ninth inning. I'm going to be stubborn like that. Will Smith wanted to put the team first. And that at times when you're booing a guy, it's like he knows that he's not doing well. And Matt Quattro knew he was not doing well, but he wasn't going anywhere. He's not getting DFA'd or cut anytime soon. They're not making snap decisions 10 games into the year. Now, does that sound hypocritical because I said James McArthur is going to be the closer? I don't think that necessarily is a snap decision because Will Smith was the first option as the closer, but he's also not the locked-in closer. He's not the guy that is going to be someone who is going to blow 5, 6, 7 games, and he's still got that role. I mean, we see that in baseball with guys that you paid a lot of money for a closer, and they're going to be it no matter what. Matt Quattro seems to like his matchups more than anything, and James McArthur pitched on Friday night, and then it was Chris Stratton who got the save on Saturday. But then on Sunday, when McArthur was healthy, that's what I'm more so getting at. When McArthur, I shouldn't say healthy, available, okay? If he's not worn down or anything, he hasn't pitched 2 days in a row. If McArthur's available, Will Smith is not going to be the closer. And we saw on Sunday in a 5-3 game, Will Smith get the 8th, which I really liked, by the way. I really, really enjoyed to see him get that in the 8th inning because he's not going to get confidence, and he's a professional. He's been around long enough. It's not like the confidence goes up and down, but I think he needed a clean outing. And he didn't need one in the 12-0 game. That's easy to do. It's easy to have a clean outing when there's nothing on the line. He needed a tight game scenario where he had to get out of it, and he had to keep that game where it was. And he gets out of the 8th inning, and he's all smiles in the dugout, and that's important. You need Will Smith to be better than what he has been if the bullpen is going to seriously improve. Then James McArthur gets the ball in the 9th, and he slams the door shut. That, to me, showed that Matt Quattro in a tight game and one that you got to have it. It's not a let's try and see if this works again. He's going to go to James McArthur because James McArthur was this team's closer last year. It's not like you're just throwing him into a spot he's not familiar with. He's done this before. And if Will Smith is going to be that lefty specialist now, so be it. He had the opportunities to close out games, and right now it's just not working. So instead of forcing it over and over and over again, you feel like this is a good spot for him. And if James McArthur struggles and doesn't really take this closer spot with authority, maybe they turn to somebody else. I don't see it being John Schreiber because they really like him in that 6th inning role right now, kind of the fireman. Chris Stratton, every once in a while, I think he's been really good since his tough start to the year. There are options to go with. But right now, I think James McArthur has taken that spot over Will Smith. We'll see, though, in the upcoming series against the Houston Astros. Before we say goodbye, one last shout-out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to preview that upcoming series against Houston. Cole Reagans will take the mound once again. I'm sure everybody's really excited for that. And maybe look ahead to the schedule once again and go series by series what we can expect from the Kansas City Royals. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.